So what do you take from your dad? What do you incorporate into your comedy routine and into your life from your
Well,
dad?
my dad was an amazing person.
Yeah.
He was just a great guy, all-around guy. And
For 20 years, fans believed they knew the whole story. They did not. Behind Don Knotts' famous smile was a secret his family kept quiet, until now. Reportedly, his own daughter finally broke her silence, confirming rumors that fans had whispered about for decades. The nervous, lovable deputy who made millions laugh was allegedly hiding something far deeper than anyone imagined. What really happened behind those cameras? Why did his family wait 20 long years after his death to speak? Join us as we uncover the truth. Don Knotts' family kept hidden for 2 decades, and the shocking confirmation that changes everything. The truth his daughter revealed after his death. After Don Knotts passed away, the world had already said its goodbyes to a beloved comedian, a television legend, and a familiar face that had brought laughter into homes for decades. Yet there was still a deeper story waiting to be told, one that only someone very close to him could share. That person was his daughter, Karen Knotts. In the years following her father's death, Karen reportedly began opening up publicly about the private side of the man millions of people thought they already knew. Through interviews, writings, and personal reflections, she allegedly revealed a version of Don Knotts that rarely appeared on television screens, a man who quietly carried deep emotional pain throughout much of his life. According to Karen, her father's struggles were not simply small worries or passing nerves. She reportedly described a man who battled real anxiety, depression, insomnia, and persistent self-doubt, even during the height of his fame. For a performer so widely loved by audiences, these revelations painted a far more complicated picture than the smiling, nervous deputy fans remembered from television. Karen's willingness to share these truths reportedly gave fans an entirely new understanding of her father. Don Knotts was not simply a nervous comedian who happened to play a nervous character. He was a man whose real emotional struggles had, in many ways, shaped the very performances that made him famous. The line between Don and Barney Fife, audiences soon realized, may have been thinner than anyone imagined. These revelations also reportedly helped explain moments from Don's life that once seemed puzzling from the outside. His decision to walk away from a successful show, his search for validation through films and a variety show, and his quiet determination to keep working despite setback after setback. Suddenly, these choices made more sense, viewed through the lens of a man constantly battling his own insecurities. For many fans, learning these details reportedly changed the way they viewed Don Knotts entirely. Instead of simply remembering a funny, nervous character on screen, they began to see a real human being who had spent much of his life quietly fighting battles that had nothing to do with cameras or scripts. Karen's honesty about her father's private struggles allegedly came from a place of love and respect, wanting the world to understand the full man behind the familiar laughter. Rather than diminishing his legacy, these truths reportedly deepened it, showing just how much strength it took for Don to keep bringing joy to others while dealing with his own private pain. Through his daughter's words, Don Knotts became more than a beloved television character. He became a real, complicated, deeply human man, one whose struggles made his gift of laughter even more remarkable. But to truly understand Don Knotts' legacy, one must step back and look at his entire life as a whole. We turn now toward the final reflection on the many sides of the man behind the laughter. The troubled childhood that shaped Don Knotts. Long before the world knew him as the nervous deputy with the shaky hands, Don Knotts was just a small boy trying to survive a hard and lonely home. He was born in Morgantown, West Virginia, in the year 1924, the youngest of 4 brothers. From the very beginning, life was not gentle with him. His family did not have much money, and the little house they lived in often felt heavy with tension instead of warmth. Reportedly, his father struggled with severe alcoholism and what many later described as serious mental illness. Sources describe a man who could turn frightening without warning, leaving young Don to grow up feeling unsafe in his own home. There was no place to hide from the fear that lived under that roof. Karen Knotts, his daughter, later revealed that her father also suffered mistreatment from his own brothers. Instead of protection, he allegedly found more pain within his own family circle. A small boy who should have felt loved and safe instead learned to stay quiet, to stay small, and to watch every mood in the room before he dared to speak. These early wounds did not simply fade away with time. They reportedly followed him for decades, shaping the anxious, uncertain, self-doubting man that friends and family would come to know behind the cameras. The same trembling hands that later made television audiences laugh may have first trembled out of real childhood fear. Yet even in that dark little house in Morgantown, something quiet was beginning to grow. Don started noticing that when he made his mother laugh, the tension in the room softened, even if only for a moment. He discovered, almost by accident, that laughter could be a kind of shield. Nobody in that house could have guessed that this frightened, uncertain boy would one day become one of America's most beloved comedians. But first, he had to find a way to survive his own mind and his own home. What Don Knotts did next would change the entire course of his life, and it started with something surprisingly simple. Could a young boy's imagination really become his lifeline? Now, we step inside the private world Don built to escape the pain around him. The boy who used comedy to escape reality. While the world outside his home felt frightening and unpredictable, young Don Knotts discovered something powerful hiding inside his own mind: imagination. When real life became too heavy to carry, he learned he could quietly slip away into stories and characters that only he could see. Alone in his room, Don reportedly began creating funny voices, silly characters, and imaginary conversations that made him laugh even when nothing else in his life felt good. This was not simply child's play. For a boy carrying so much fear at home, it became something closer to survival. Comedy slowly became his secret escape hatch. Where his father's anger could not follow, and where his brother's teasing could not reach, Don built a private world built entirely from humor. Sources describe him practicing faces and voices for hours, testing what made people smile, and quietly building the skills that would define his entire career. There was something else happening beneath the laughter, too. The very same nervous energy that made Don feel unsafe as a child, the same jumpy, uncertain feeling in his chest, slowly became raw material for his comedy. Instead of hiding his anxiety completely, he began performing it, exaggerating it, and turning it into something audiences would one day find hilarious rather than sad. This connection between his real pain and his stage persona would later become the heart of his most famous character. The same trembling voice, the same wide, worried eyes, the same nervous energy that once came from real childhood fear would one day make millions of people laugh as Barney Fife. But that transformation was still many years away. First, young Don had to leave Morgantown behind and find a way to turn this private hobby into something the whole world could see. He had a gift growing quietly inside him, but gifts do not become careers on their own. How did a frightened boy from West Virginia end up performing for soldiers during one of history's darkest wars? To understand that, we follow Don Knotts from a small-town childhood into the uniform of the United States Army, where his comedy would finally meet its first real audience. From the Army to the beginning of a dream. When Don Knotts left the fear and sadness of his childhood home behind, he did not yet know where life would take him. But soon, a much bigger storm was approaching, one that would touch the entire world. World War II had begun, and like so many young men of his generation, Don was called to serve. Instead of holding a weapon on the front lines, Don reportedly found his place performing for soldiers as part of an army entertainment troupe. Sources describe him traveling from base to base, using comedy sketches and character voices to lift the spirits of tired, frightened young men who were far from home. In many ways, this was the perfect training ground. The very same skills he had quietly built alone in his childhood bedroom were now being tested in front of real audiences, night after night. This experience reportedly gave Don something he had never truly had before: confidence. For the first time, his nervous energy and silly voices were not something to hide. They were something people actually wanted to see. Watching soldiers laugh, even for just a few minutes, seemed to show him that his gift had real value in the world. When the war finally ended, Don did not return home to settle down quietly. Instead, he made a bold decision. He packed up what little money he had and moved to New York City, hoping to turn his wartime performances into a real career. This was a frightening leap for a young man who had grown up with so little. The early years in New York were reportedly difficult. Work was scarce, money was tighter, and rejection came often. Don allegedly spent long stretches auditioning, performing small roles, and wondering whether his dream of entertaining people would ever truly take off. Yet through all the setbacks, he continued showing up, refusing to let go of the one thing that had always given him comfort: comedy. Slowly, small opportunities began appearing: radio work, minor television spots, tiny steps that barely resembled the fame that would one day follow. But each small job added another layer to his skills and another piece of confidence to a man who had once felt invisible inside his own childhood home. Don Knotts was no longer that frightened boy hiding from his father's anger. He was becoming a performer, slowly, carefully, and against real odds. But greater success was still waiting just around the corner, and it would begin with one simple meeting. Who was the man who would soon change Don's entire future and turn him into a household name? We look ahead at the friendship that set everything in motion. The meeting that changed everything. Sometimes one single meeting can change an entire life. And for Don Knotts, that meeting came in the form of a fellow performer named Andy Griffith. Their paths reportedly crossed in the world of stage and radio, long before either of them became household names. And something about their connection felt different from the start. Andy and Don shared an easy, natural chemistry, the kind that cannot simply be practiced or forced. Sources describe their early friendship as warm, playful, and built on mutual respect for each other's comedic timing. Neither man could have fully known it yet, but this friendship was about to become one of the most important partnerships in television history. When Andy Griffith was offered his own television show, he reportedly remembered his talented friend from those earlier years. Don was brought in to play a small-town deputy named Barney Fife, a nervous, excitable character who took his job far too seriously. It seemed, at first, like just another role. Nobody could have predicted what was about to happen. Almost immediately, audiences fell in love with Barney Fife. His shaking hands, his single bullet kept carefully in his shirt pocket, and his constant nervous energy became instantly unforgettable. Millions of viewers tuned in each week, not just for Andy's calm wisdom, but for Don's hilarious, high-strung energy standing right beside him. What made the character so believable, according to those close to him, was how much of Don's real personality lived inside Barney Fife. The nervous energy that once came from real childhood fear was now being performed on television screens across America, turning private pain into public laughter. The role quickly earned Don multiple Emmy Awards. cementing him as one of the most beloved comedic actors of his generation. The frightened boy from Morgantown, who once hid quietly from an unpredictable home, was now standing at the center of one of the most successful shows on television. Yet fame, as wonderful as it seemed from the outside, was reportedly beginning to carry its own heavy weight. Behind the cameras, in quiet moments away from the studio lights, old feelings that Don thought he had left behind in childhood were starting to resurface. Could a man so loved on screen truly be struggling in private? We turn now to the quiet battles Don Knotts was reportedly fighting, far from the cameras, hidden behind Barney Fife's famous smile. The pain behind Barney Fife's famous smile. To millions of viewers, Don Knotts appeared to be living a dream. He was famous, admired, and constantly making people laugh. Yet, according to his daughter Karen Knotts, the man behind Barney Fife was quietly carrying a very different reality, one filled with anxiety, depression, insomnia, and constant self-doubt. Sources describe Don as someone who struggled deeply with nerves, even long after he had become a respected, successful actor. The same trembling energy that audiences found so funny on screen reportedly reflected something very real happening inside him. Fame did not erase the fear that had followed him since childhood. In many ways, it simply gave that fear a much bigger stage. Karen reportedly recalled her father lying awake for long stretches at night, unable to quiet his mind. Sleep did not come easily for a man whose thoughts often turned toward worry and doubt. Despite his success, Don allegedly questioned himself constantly, wondering if he truly deserved the praise and admiration he received. There was also something more complicated happening beneath the surface, the blurred line between Don and the character he played. Audiences adored Barney Fife's nervous energy, but for Don, that same nervous energy was not simply an act. It was reportedly a piece of his own personality, exaggerated for entertainment, yet still deeply connected to real emotional pain. This created a painful contradiction. The world laughed at the very qualities that privately caused Don so much suffering. While viewers saw a lovable, bumbling deputy, the man underneath was allegedly fighting a quiet, constant battle with his own mind, one that fame and applause could not fully heal. Despite these struggles, Don reportedly continued showing up, performing, and creating laughter for others, even during his hardest emotional moments. To many who knew him personally, this made his talent even more remarkable. He was not simply playing a nervous character, he was channeling real vulnerability into something the whole world could enjoy. Yet, a man cannot separate himself from his own character forever. Eventually, Don began wondering whether he could ever be seen as anything other than Barney Fife, or whether the character had quietly become a cage. Would leaving the show that made him famous bring him the freedom he was searching for? Or would it lead to even greater struggles? We follow Don's difficult attempt to step out of Barney Fife's shadow and build a new chapter for himself. When Don Knotts tried to escape Barney Fife. By the time Don Knotts had spent several years wearing Barney Fife's uniform, something inside him began to change. The role that once gave him confidence and success was now reportedly starting to feel like a shadow he could not step out from under. Fans loved Barney, but Don, according to those close to him, wanted the world to see that he was capable of so much more. So Don made a bold decision. He chose to leave the Andy Griffith Show at the height of its popularity, walking away from the very role that had made him a household name. This was a risky move for any actor, but for a man who had spent his whole life doubting his own worth, it may have felt even heavier. Sources describe this choice as an attempt to prove, both to audiences and to himself, that Barney Fife was not the only character he had inside him. Don soon moved into feature films, hoping this new chapter would bring the same success he had found on television. He starred in movies such as The Ghost and Mr. Chicken and The Reluctant Astronaut, playing nervous, awkward, lovable characters that echoed pieces of his earlier fame. Audiences at the time reportedly did not rush to theaters the way Don may have hoped. The instant success he once knew on television did not immediately follow him to the big screen. It would take years before these same films earned the deep appreciation they receive today, remembered fondly as classic comedies loved by generations of fans. But in the moment, the quieter box office numbers likely stung for a man already carrying old wounds of self-doubt from his childhood. Alongside his films, Don also attempted his own variety show, hoping to build something entirely his own, separate from Andy Griffith and separate from Barney Fife. Reportedly, the show did not find the lasting success he had hoped for, and it ended after a short run. For a man who had already spent so much of his life questioning his own value, this disappointment may have cut painfully deep. Despite these setbacks, Don reportedly refused to give up on his career or his craft. He continued working, continued performing, and continued searching for new ways to make audiences laugh, even while quietly carrying the weight of unmet expectations. Friends close to him described a man who rarely let his private disappointments show on the outside, choosing instead to keep smiling for the people around him. Yet these struggles, both professional and personal, may have been slowly building towards something far more serious. As Don grew older, his body itself was about to test him in ways no career setback ever could. What happened next would challenge not just Don's career, but his very ability to see the world around him. We turn now toward the difficult years that were still waiting for Don Knotts. The illnesses that took away his final years. As Don Knotts grew older, life presented him with challenges far more difficult than any disappointing movie or canceled television show. His body itself began to fail him, slowly stealing away the very things he had once used to bring joy to millions of people. One of the hardest blows came when Don was reportedly diagnosed with macular degeneration, a condition that slowly damages a person's central vision. For a performer whose entire career depended on expressive faces, timing, and reading a room, the gradual loss of his eyesight was an especially painful blow. Sources describe Don struggling to adjust to a world that was slowly growing darker and blurrier around him. A frightening experience for anyone, but perhaps even more so for a man who had spent his life connecting with audiences through sight and expression. As if this were not enough, Don also faced an even more serious battle: lung cancer. This illness reportedly began taking a serious toll on his body, weakening him physically in ways that were impossible to hide. For a man already dealing with declining vision, this second diagnosis added an even heavier burden to carry during what should have been peaceful later years. Yet even during these frightening health struggles, those close to Don remembered something remarkable about him. According to his daughter Karen, her father continued trying to make the people around him laugh, even while quietly battling failing eyesight and a serious illness. Comedy, the very thing that once helped a frightened little boy escape a painful childhood home, remained a comfort and identity for him until his final days. Reportedly, Don's sense of humor did not disappear along with his health. Even in hospital rooms and quiet visits with family, he allegedly still found small moments to lighten the mood, whether through a playful comment or a familiar joke. For those who loved him, this persistence likely made his illness even more emotional to witness. Watching a man who had spent his whole life giving laughter to others, now needing comfort himself. As his condition worsened, Don's world slowly grew smaller, filled mostly with close family and lifelong friends rather than studio lights and film sets. The loud applause of television audiences had quieted, replaced instead by softer, more private moments with those who truly knew him. Through all of this suffering, Don's spirit reportedly remained recognizable to those around him, still warm, still funny, still trying to bring comfort to others even while he needed it most. But even the strongest spirit cannot fight forever, and Don's final days were now drawing near. We turn toward the emotional final chapter of Don Knotts' life, and the friend who stood beside him until the very end. The final moments of a comedy legend. As Don Knotts' health continued to decline, his world grew quieter, smaller, and more centered on the people who loved him most. The bright studio lights and cheering audiences that once filled his life had long faded into memory, replaced instead by hospital rooms, family visits, and quiet conversations with those closest to his heart. Throughout this difficult final chapter, one relationship reportedly remained especially important: his lifelong friendship with Andy Griffith. The two men, who had shared one of television's most beloved comedic partnerships decades earlier, allegedly remained close friends long after the Andy Griffith Show had ended. Their bond, built on years of laughter, mutual respect, and shared history, reportedly never faded, even as time and distance separated them. According to those familiar with his final days, Andy Griffith was reportedly by Don's side when he passed away on February 24, 2006. For two men who had brought so much joy into American households together, this final moment together carried deep emotional weight. It was a quiet, powerful reminder that behind the television screens and famous characters, their friendship had always been real. Sources describe this final farewell as deeply emotional for everyone involved. Andy Griffith, reportedly overcome with sadness, later spoke about how much his friendship with Don had meant to him over the years. For fans who had grown up watching their comedic chemistry each week, learning that this bond remained strong until Don's very last moments added an even deeper layer of meaning to their partnership. Family members, including his daughter Karen, reportedly stayed close during these final days as well, holding on to precious last memories with a father who had given so much laughter to the world, while quietly carrying his own private pain for most of his life. These final moments were reportedly filled with love, gratitude, and quiet reflection on a life that had touched millions of people. News of Don Knotts' passing spread quickly, with fans, fellow actors, and admirers around the world expressing deep sadness at the loss of such a beloved figure. Tributes reportedly poured in from people whose childhoods had been shaped by his nervous, lovable characters, proving just how deeply his comedy had touched generations of viewers. Though his body had finally given out after years of illness, the laughter he created during his lifetime remained very much alive in the hearts of everyone who had watched him over the decades. Yet even after his passing, one important part of his story was still waiting to be told. We turn now toward the emotional truths his daughter Karen would later share with the world, revealing the real man who had lived quietly behind Barney Fife's famous smile. The man behind the laughter. When we look back across the entire life of Don Knotts, it becomes clear that his story was never simply about comedy. It was about a man who faced real pain, real fear, and real self-doubt, yet still managed to give the world something rare and precious: joy. From a frightened little boy growing up in a difficult home in Morgantown, West Virginia, to a nervous performer finding his voice among soldiers during World War II, Don's early years reportedly planted the seeds of both his talent and his struggles. The same anxious energy that once came from real childhood fear would one day become the foundation of one of television's most beloved characters. As Barney Fife, Don brought laughter into millions of homes each week, earning multiple Emmy Awards and becoming a true television icon. Yet behind that famous nervous smile, according to his daughter Karen, was a man reportedly battling anxiety, depression, and insomnia, carrying private burdens that rarely matched the joyful character audiences adored. Even after stepping away from the show that made him famous, Don continued searching for purpose through films, a variety show, and countless other projects, refusing to let setbacks define him completely. Later in life, he faced declining eyesight and a serious illness, yet reportedly continued using humor to comfort those around him until his very final days. When Don passed away in the year 2006, with his lifelong friend Andy Griffith reportedly by his side, the world lost a comedy legend. But it was only after his death that fans truly began to understand the depth of the man behind the character, thanks to his daughter Karen's honest and loving revelations. Don Knotts was, in many ways, a man of contradictions. He was an Emmy-winning actor who privately doubted his own worth. He was a beloved comedian who quietly struggled with depression. He was a defeated father who carried painful memories from his own childhood, yet worked to build a loving family of his own. Perhaps this is what makes his story so powerful. Don's greatest gift may not have simply been his ability to make people laugh. It may have been his quiet courage to keep creating laughter, even during the times when his own life gave him every reason to cry. His legacy today reminds us that the people who bring us the most joy are often carrying private battles we never see. Don Knotts taught the world to laugh, even while he was quietly learning how to survive his own pain. After learning about the struggles Don Knotts faced behind the scenes, do you see the legendary comedian differently? And what do you think his daughter Karen's revelations tell us about the man behind Barney Fife? If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.